This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Place to Be Nation, welcome back to another edition of Making Mount Rushmore here on the Pop Experience. I am your host / moderator and panelist for this episode, Steve Riddle. And today we are going to be delving back into the world of video games. It's been quite a while since we've touched on this topic. I think it was actually back in March when we last did this. And joining me on this journey, it's just going to be a two-man group here today, as I have only one guest with me. He has been on before, and coincidentally enough, he was the last time he was on was for that last episode about video games. So good to have him back. You can usually find him over on the North-South Connection feed with his ever unique and interesting multiverse fabulousness. And he is about to start off a new podcast feed dubbed The New TNN, which he will, of course, talk about here in a bit. It is Mr. Johnnie Sea. Johnny, how are you, sir?
Steve, I'm doing well, man. I appreciate you inviting me back on here to talk about some video games. One of my favorite topics.
Yeah, of course. Definitely one of my favorites as well. And for this episode, as I said, the last time you were on, we discussed two specific genres of video games, horror and RPGs. Today, we're going to be flipping it up a little bit, and we're going to be talking about two specific consoles. For those of you who are like me and probably like Johnny, grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, the two consoles that really kind of dominated the video game world at the time were the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. I myself actually had both of these consoles. It's funny, when my parents had gotten divorced and they moved to different houses, and I would visit my dad every other weekend. I actually had each console at a different house. I had the Super Nintendo at my mom's house and the Sega at my dad's house. So kind of a interesting dynamic there. But for this first half, we're going to be discussing the Super Nintendo first. This, of course, was the successor to the original Nintendo Entertainment System. Brought the games over from 8-bit to 16-bit and kind of ushered in a great series of years there for Nintendo throughout the 90s with some great games that we're, of course, going to talk about here. So, Johnny, why don't you go ahead and get us started off here by giving us your first entry on your Mount Rushmore of Super Nintendo games?
Absolutely. So I'm sort of the opposite of you, I guess, in a sense that I didn't have both, but I was definitely a Genesis kid growing up. So with the Super Nintendo list, it's interesting to me because I came to a lot of these later in life on emulators and then legally owned systems of the same nature later on. I probably should have led with that one. But my point being is that, a lot of these are sort of found later in life, with the exception of a few. However, the first one I want to talk about is the definition of killer app. Because when you are a kidster sitting at home and you see the Super Nintendo commercial, it's coming to stores soon, and they show you a 16-bit bullet bill that in my little kid brain takes up the entire screen. That is Super Mario World, and that's why it absolutely has to be on the list. It is the killer app for the Super Nintendo. It is a legendary game that I still don't think I've beaten every level to, and it's a great gather round and multiple people can play that don't even like video games sort of game. That's normally not my biggest draw, but I've seen it happen too many times, and it leads to a good time. The Super Mario World has to be included.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree, and I had it on my Mount Rushmore as well. Obviously, when you think Nintendo, you think Mario, and when the Super Nintendo came out, you knew that there was going to be a Mario game to kind of be the anchor for it. And after the success of Super Mario 3, I think that Nintendo was definitely in a position to try to build off of that. And when Super Mario World came out, seeing it in 16-bit, seeing like the graphics of it really was just so unique, and it introduced us to Yoshi. We were transported to a new world. It gave the Koopa Kids another outing as the bad guys, and just the numerous pathways that you could take throughout the game to get to like those secret levels, and just the amount of hours you can just put into this thing, I think really just made it one of the best games, not just for the Super Nintendo, but in gaming in general. I mean, it's still considered one of the greatest games ever made, and it would actually be the best-selling Super Nintendo game of all time with over 20 million copies. So definitely a big home run there for Nintendo, and definitely continues the run that Mario was on at that point. So definitely a good pick, and definitely I think when you ask a lot of people, this would definitely be on their Mount Rushmores.
Yeah, even if you
Super
take
Nintendo
away
games.
even if you take away the gameplay elements, just the spectacle and showmanship of the entire presentation. The first time you boot it up and the first time you experience some things for the first time, I don't think it can be understated how much of a graphical leap it was. And then the animation style was also unlike anything you would see on the Genesis at the time as well. So it really was a wholly unique experience. And for the longest time, only like one of two games you could own. It, I can't. I don't. Do you know if is F-Zero the other game that came out the same day as launch day?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because my best friend had the system. They got Mario World with it, and then they got F-Zero on launch week, and that's how I played it for the most.
Yeah, it was when it was released in Japan, it was this one and F-Zero were the two like launch games for it.
Okay.
It doesn't say though if it was the same for North America.
I gotcha. It just, and hey, and I'm not trying to be and I could be misremembering. Do not get me wrong. But that's what I'm thinking. It's not really relevant, but it's, like I said, it was just a different feel right out of the box, and it really put it in your face because those bullet bills are in World 1-1. That's not an accident, and I don't mean to keep harping on that. I kind of meant it as a joke, but to me, it was huge, and it was one of the first things you see. So they were definitely trying to show off, and it worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, like I said, bringing it to a different because at that point, the Mario games had been in the Mushroom Kingdom, and now we were in this whole new world, Dinosaur Land. Like I said, which brought us Yoshi for the first time. So definitely it was a big risk for Nintendo, and it definitely paid off in the end. So good on them. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and give my next entry onto my Mount Rushmore of Super Nintendo games, and this wasn't a game I don't recall playing. I may have played it once or twice, but another game that built off what had been a successful launch back in the day, and that is Super Metroid. This, of course, was released in 1994. It was the third installment in the Metroid series, following the original Metroid, of course, and then the Game Boy Metroid 2 Return of Samus game. Similar to Super Mario World, this game built off the what Metroid had begun back when it first was released, and another game that was released to real critical acclaim. I know a lot of people out there probably thought this game was better than the original Metroid, and some probably consider this still the best game of the Metroid series. Did very, very well. It was one of the top 10 selling games of '94 when it came out, and it kind of gave another level to Samus as being one of the iconic characters of not just Nintendo, but of video gaming in general. And I know, Johnny, you had this on your Mount Rushmore as well.
Yeah, and ironically, this is a game I didn't come to until the pandemic. Now, I grew up playing Metroid and Metroid 2 for Game Boy, and then when I was in college, I got a hold of Metroid Prime, and that's what a good game. But I got an SNES Classic a little bit before the pandemic started, and Super Metroid was one of those bucket list games, and I could never really get it to emulate quite right because but that's a story for another time, or maybe somewhere else. But my point is that I came to it. It's a beautiful experience. I think it probably is remembered so fondly because it's an enhancement in every way over the original, graphically and presentation wise. Music, we could debate back and forth, but I think that there's a certain plot element. There are plot elements added to it this go around too, so it endears it more to the fandom, as if now we understand things just a little bit more on top of having a great experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And what's interesting about it is I'm just kind of reading up on it. There would not be another Metroid game after this for 8 years. So it was kind of kind of weird that this game did so well and is considered so great, yet it took a while before a sequel came out, because I know a lot of people were waiting to see a Metroid game for the Nintendo 64, but we never unfortunately got it. So
it's weird. You don't see many franchises in video games these days hold back. Metroid seems like one of those that has remained. Now, there have been a couple of offshoots over the years that have been sort of put the brand net down a little bit. There's some sort of pinball game, and the other M wasn't too great, but they've stuck to their guns and tried to praise quality over quantity. But that is crazy to hear that stat of 8 years.
Yeah, I mean, the only time we saw Samus on the N64 was when she was in Smash Brothers. So
that's true. Wow, I bet they had the hardest time trying to figure out what to do on the N64 with a Metroid title.
Yeah, like I think that was the big thing. Is like how would you use the controller to control her? So it would have been interesting to see, like I said, if they had released the Metroid game on the N64, how that would have turned out. So, maybe in another world we would have seen it happen, or another timeline we would have seen it happen.
There you go. Somewhere out in the multiverse, some kid's playing it right now.
Right. All right. Well, okay, Johnny, why don't you go ahead and give us another entry on your Mount Rushmore of Super Nintendo games?
All right. So this is another one that I tried to always play when I would go to my friend's house. Of course, it was old news to them, but to me, it was a leap forward with a series that I was in love with on the Nintendo, and that is Mega Man X. Now, it's Mega Man's first 16-bit foray. They did do a Mega Man 7 for the Super Nintendo as well. But X, I feel like, is a superior leap, whereas 7 felt weird to me because it was a continuation of Nintendo. Mega Man X was supposed to be something brand new, and it did add a lot of new elements to Capcom's beloved franchise. And I'm kind of a sucker for Mega Man. Most of my podcast shows are named after Mega Man Robot Masters. So, kind of a sucker for it.
Yeah, I don't recall playing Mega Man a lot. Again, one of those things where I may have, played it like once or twice. One of the few Super Nintendo games that actually also was there was a port for the PC as well.
Oh God, that's right.
So you have that extra avenue to play the game. And I mean, again, another game that did pretty well when it came out, and it just spawned a whole bunch of different ports of it. I know it would eventually be there would be the future like titles would go on to like the Sega Saturn and into the PlayStation, that sort of thing. So really, just another kind of avenue for Mega Man to get big. And like you said, the first Mega Man game to be in 16-bit, and just a really one of those games I think you get a deeper appreciation of when you go back to play it. Yeah,
it introduced a lot of the like Zero and Sigma, and it switched things up from the NES numbered series where it was instead of like Top Man, Shadow Man, it was adjective animal, which is silly, but like Storm Owl, stuff like that, Storm Eagle, like it really became its own thing while replicating something we were comfortable and familiar with. And I think it's one of the reasons the series has endured, for better or worse. Mm-hmm. It continues to evolve without changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also it's funny because I was seeing that apparently people got when they bought the game for the first time, they got confused because they thought the X meant that was the 10th edition in the game, but obviously it wasn't. So
that's ridiculous, but also hilarious to hear people say that because there had only been 6 games. Oh yeah.
Unless they thought there were games out there that they didn't know about. So
well, hey, we'll have to talk about that later because that is true. That definitely happens.
Right. Okay, well, I will go ahead here and give my next entry on my Mount Rushmore of Super Nintendo games. And as I had way back like a year or so ago when we were discussing franchises of video games, I said when it came to Nintendo, the 2 franchises I think most people remember are Mario and Zelda. And of course, for the Super Nintendo, their big Zelda game was, of course, A Link to the Past, which came out in 1992, and kind of similar, like I said, like we were talking about the Super Mario World and Super Metroid. This built off of the original Zelda, and then of course Zelda 2: The Adventures of Link. and it would end up arguably becoming one of the biggest games that the Super Nintendo ever had. It was also another game that was very critically acclaimed. Just the idea of traveling between the light world and the dark world for Link as he's trying to save the sages from Ganon, and just going back to the because in the Adventures of Link, it transitioned from that top down gameplay to a side scroller. In this game, Link to the Past reverts back to that old top down camera view, which I think a lot of people missed in the Adventures of Link. So again, another franchise that has really done extremely well for Nintendo. When we get to maybe other consoles, we'll talk about obviously future Zelda games. But I think when it comes down to it, you cannot deny what A Link to the Past did for Nintendo and for the Super Nintendo itself. So, Johnny, do you have anything else to say about A Link to the Past?
I mean, it doesn't make my list. Because not having the system, it's simply one of those games that takes a little bit longer time to play. I feel bad hearing you mention it because it's obviously it absolutely belongs on there because it's such quality. It really pushes everything to the limit. It uses sound design so well. I love the opening sequence. Just the title screen, as silly as that sounds, but it's so polished, and it really shows the power of the system. And not just looks, but also the way that it feels, the way that it controls, and just the fun you have, the way that it plays. So I'm in 100% agreement and almost embarrassed I didn't include it myself, but I just didn't play it a lot. It wasn't until all the secrets had been revealed to me because my friends all had it that, I actually got a hold of it myself. So it didn't resonate as much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's funny. That's another thing that when you talk about a lot of these games, one of the things that draws us to them is the soundtrack and the score. I mean, some of these games just have such amazing scores behind them. I mean, like Link to the Past, Super Mario World is just so recognizable. And even though modern day games still have some really do have some great scores as well, but I think they are not as fondly remembered as some of these older games are. Like when you ask a lot of people about video game scores, they'll obviously go back to some of these older games. So I think that's something else that we take into account as well when remembering these older games.
Yeah, the scores are important too because they can actually create thematic elements, and it almost becomes kind of like Star Wars. Every character has a special motif that they play, and those pass from generation to generation. Zelda's Lullaby, or the little tone it makes when you find a secret, or the overworld theme. Those things persist, and that makes it, something that we want to return to. It's artistic, dare I say. And, Nintendo is one of those companies that early on showed that you can be artistic without a huge narrative. It's kind of their bread and butter. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I totally 100% agree with you on that one. All right. Well, you've only got one entry left on your Mount Rushmore Super Nintendo games, so why don't you go ahead and give it to us?
Well, it's kind of funny because it's almost the opposite of what we just said. Obviously, it's a Super Nintendo game, but it wasn't published by Nintendo, whereas they sort of keep their narratives thin but rich. This is a game that has, I was going to say a rich narrative. It does, but you really have to look in between the cracks to get it. It is a role-playing game, big shocker, and I almost am embarrassed because it was on the RPG list that we talked about the last time I was here, but it's Earthbound. It has to be. I mean, it's a ridiculously unique experience that could have only been had on the Super Nintendo. There are some other great RPGs out there that aren't necessarily console exclusive and have been readily available in 1,000 different ways over the years, but Earthbound has remained constant. It's a standard of excellence, maturity, but also it's just a video game. And it's just a video game. It wears its presentation openly, but it has a lot more to it underneath. And it's a pretty fun RPG too, so why not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do remember when we did talk about this when we talked about RPGs, and it's funny because when it was first originally released in the U.S., it didn't the buzz behind it wasn't too too well received, and sales were actually not too good. It wasn't until like years later that it got the recognition that it definitely deserved, and also, I think a lot of that also was when Ness was in Super Smash Brothers as a hidden character. I think that that was one of the bigger surprises of that at that time, and it kind of gave almost like a kind of reintroduction of Earthbound and that series as a whole.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember that and being like, "Who's this kid?" Because it's a game that I played later in life, and it's not. The sad thing is it's not. I don't know if it's sad, but I sit here and I realize that it's a kind of an obvious pick, and I also know that it's not like a perfect game. It can, it's not, but it tries so much in a genre that is pretty cut and dry a lot of times, especially in that era. I don't know, like it's just too damn charming and too damn creative to not just embrace as sort of a mascot for this is what we were capable of in terms of the art of gaming. And what I don't know if you mentioned the year, but it's got to be like 95, 96-ish. With limited capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was June 95. It came out in the US. So
okay, so you could play Earthbound, watch King of the Ring, and then go back to playing Earthbound.
if you even want to watch King of the Ring, so
come on, pal, it's King Mabel.
If you want more in-depth analysis on King of the Ring 95, there's a bunch of other podcasts out there that have done a far more in-depth analysis on that than I think anyone else could do. So
for sure, I don't. Yeah, definitely, it's not here.
No, it's not. All right. Well, I will go ahead and give my last entry on this on my Mount Rushmore Super Nintendo games, and this is one where I could have gone with any of them in the series, but I of course went with the first one here, and that's of course Donkey Kong Country, which was released in 1994. It was kind of the first time that Donkey Kong had been transitioned from a villain to the hero. This is where we get the debut of Diddy Kong, and they go out and try to they recover their bananas from King K. Rool and his Kremlins, and like I said, it spawned two equally good games. You had Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest, and then Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. The third one I remember playing actually a lot more than I did these first two, but like I said, Donkey Kong Country definitely kind of brought Donkey Kong into a new light. And again, it's one of those things where it's like you could take so many different paths across all the levels. You get to be different animals at certain points. And again, one of those games that's still considered one of the best of all time, and brought, like I said, brought Donkey Kong into a whole new light after he had been just known for that at that point as the villain in the arcade game. So I thought that this game definitely deserves some recognition here. Johnny, do you have anything else to say about Donkey Kong Country?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. It revitalized the IP completely, and it made Donkey Kong something you could. I mean, I know the arcade game is like legendary and competitive and stuff like that, and I'm not trying to take that away from it. But in terms of like home-based entertainment, not trying to sound like Vince McMahon, that's a real phrase, home-based entertainment. Like it completely made Donkey Kong something that like my kids know who Donkey Kong is. It's probably from Smash Brothers, but Donkey Kong wouldn't be in Smash Brothers if it wasn't for Donkey Kong Country. And you cannot deny that, especially the first one, the presentation of the characters in motion and the enemies and what have you, it was like watching a Pixar movie compared to a Disney 2D animated film at the time in terms of how different it felt. I don't know how they rendered the graphics or what system they used. I don't have those technical specs and knowledge, but it was impressive to me anyway. They also, my friend who had the Super Nintendo had some VHS tape that was like the making of Donkey Kong Country, or some sort of like 15-minute tape that Nintendo Power sent him, and we watched it incessantly until that game came out. I was ready to go to his house and use his Super Nintendo to play Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah, I actually remember I had a pair of Nintendo Power tapes that they used to release, and coincidentally enough, they also revolved, but it wasn't about Donkey Kong Country. One of them was about Donkey Kong 64, along with
Ah,
Jet Force Gemini, and then the other one was about Diddy Kong Racing, which I was gonna actually make a point about the fact that thanks to this game and more particular, specifically the next game, Diddy Kong really became as big of a name as Donkey did. I mean, the fact that Diddy got his own racing game, and he's been, featured a lot more prominently in like the Smash Brothers and the Mario Party. Um, so I think thanks to this game that Diddy Kong, became a household name right up there with Donkey. So
Diddy Kong has a little bit of Poochie syndrome, though. He's got the backwards hat, and he's a little more hip than Donkey. But I do like Diddy Kong. But he's definitely one of those '90s. There's another one on the other system we'll talk about. This just sort of hip animated mascot characters.
Yeah, never thought I would ever hear Diddy Kong be compared to Poochie of all people.
And I'm not. Diddy Kong has more credibility. I'm just saying that he's like 8% Poochie.
Well, Diddy's not going to be Diddy's not going to get in a rocket and go back up to his home planet. And
that is true.
Get destroyed along the way. So
Diddy Kong was embraced by the culture. I just feel like his hat makes me feel like someone sat in a couple of people sat in a room and were like, how can we make Diddy Kong cool? What would the kids want Diddy Kong to wear? A backwards hat. That's the 8% of Diddy Kong that's Poochie. The rest is all Nintendo heart.
That's funny. All right, well, that will conclude both of our Mount Rushmores here, but we do both have some honorable mentions we want to talk about. So, Johnny, if you want to go ahead and give your first honorable mention.
Sure. And this honorable mention is it's an honorable mention because it's, these are our list. Mega Man Soccer. I played this game incessantly with my friend that had the Super Nintendo, and we were both big Mega Man fans. And Capcom just made a soccer sim where you could play as different robots from Mega Man, and every robot had like a special move kick that you could do during the match. Like it's just, I don't know that this game means anything to anyone or if it's revered in circles of gaming culture, but we played it incessantly, and I love it. It's got a spot in my heart. So, because when I think of it, I think of being a kid and hanging out with my friends. So, Mega Man Soccer.
Right. That's definitely an interesting choice there. I don't know if a lot of people knew that there was a Mega Man Soccer game. I certainly didn't until you mentioned that, because when you talk about Nintendo, like those sports spinoffs, it's usually all the Mario ones that you think about. You don't realize, and even to a certain degree, Sonic, you don't realize that Mega Man had his own too. Maybe actually one of the first ones.
Yeah, it's so crazy, man. Like I remember, I went to his house and he was like, "Dude, I got a new game, Mega Man Soccer," and I was kind of like, what the hell is that? Like, I know what Mega Man is. I know what soccer is. We play soccer. But why would they do this? That was my first thought. Why did they do this? He handed me the controller, and I was like, oh, this is why they did it, because it's fun. But it didn't make sense. It's like Little Mermaid soccer. It's the same thing. Like a big thing from the 80s getting a sports spinoff. I just saw that some Little Mermaid trailer, so it was in my head.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will go ahead and give my first honorable mention here. And we talked about it briefly when we mentioned Super Mario World as one of the launch titles. The other one, of course, was, as we mentioned, F-Zero. Really a unique game for its time period, being the racing type game, so futuristic. The tracks were sometimes, unbearable to have to deal with at times, but they were so fun. They had each one was, you had three different leagues: the Knight, the Queen, the King. It made Captain Falcon into a household name as he eventually would get into Smash Brothers himself.
Falcon Punch.
Yeah, it was just another one of those games that really kind of set the standard for racing games at that time. And I know a lot of people were excited for F-Zero to go on the Nintendo 64. But I think that one kind of I don't think that ended up happening. And then when it did come up for the GameCube, it wasn't as successful. So that's kind of unfortunate because I think they could have had a really good franchise on here with how well this game did when it first came out. So did you have anything else to say about F-Zero, Johnny?
Just great presentation. Very I don't want to call it cinematic, but it's kind of like, to me, playing F-Zero is akin to watching like some big expensive movie that is just there to entertain you and it doesn't really care. Like, I don't want to say like the Fast and the Furious franchise because I think those are really stupid, but like, I don't know, maybe like the first Transformers movie in a way, like it's just big dumb cinema. Now, I'm not saying F-Zero is dumb, but the presentation is very bombastic. The graphical presentation is such a leap for the time, and it's I'm doing finger quotes, sports sim, but it's insane. So yeah, it's kind of like Excite Bike in a way. You've got Mario launch title. We need something where the kids press a button and you drive a vehicle. Now that makes it sound like I'm belittling it. I'm not. It's an absolute right place, right time game. That's, you say the spinoffs weren't successful. It doesn't surprise me because F-Zero is such a you had to be there game, in my opinion. But it's legendary though. You cannot. It looks beautiful. It looked beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of similar. And another racing game. I didn't have it on my list, but I do remember playing it a lot. Hyperzone, kind of that same thing. So we're just the tracks were really cool. You had to fight off all these bad guys while you were racing. So I thought that was I thought I would mention that as well, just because I do remember playing that game a lot. All right, Johnny, why don't you go ahead and give us the next honorable mention?
Sure. So it's we did the RPG episode. I was trying to think of how I want to explain this. I'll just come right out with it. It's Final Fantasy 3, which is Final Fantasy 6. I mean, some would say it's the best Final Fantasy, and if it's the best Final Fantasy, that means it's got to be in consideration for one of the best, at least top 10 games of all time, because I think that franchise has cachet to it, regardless of what they've done to it over the years. And but I've been able to play it in so many different ways on so many different systems, and I never experienced Final Fantasy 3 or 6 for the SNES as an owner, just a secondhand. I first played 6 on the PlayStation. God help me with the awful loading times. But it has to be spoken of. It'd be cosmic sin not to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we did talk about this too when we were discussing RPGs. Yep. Like I said, it's widely considered one of the best of all time, and when you're talking Final Fantasy for the Super Nintendo, I think this is definitely the one everyone thinks about. So I definitely I understand why you put it on at least your honorable mentions. So good choice there. So all right, I'll do another entry on my honorable mentions, and another franchise that really that kind of launched into the stratosphere thanks to the Super Nintendo, Star Fox. It was the first game, of course, for the Super Nintendo. And it just, again, one of those games that kind of broke the mold when it came to just having that, the style of animation and the gameplay. It, introduced us to, like I said, to Fox McCloud and his team, Falco, Peppy, and Slippy, as they fight the battle against Andross. And it's just one of those games that's just visually just absolutely stunning. And as we would see as we would get future games, they just kind of continue to build on that. And it made Fox a household name, especially as we got into the later years. So I definitely think that this game deserved at least a mention on my honorable mentions as one of the better, as one of the best games that the Super Nintendo ever came up with. So, Johnny, do you have anything else to say about Star Fox?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the Super FX chip did, but I know that Star Fox had it because they had such great commercials. I actually, even though I didn't own, like I've said numerous times, I don't mean to be redundant, a Super Nintendo, I had a Star Fox poster that I got out of an Electronic Gaming Monthly, I think it was, up on my wall for years because I just loved it. It was all 4 of the animal characters looking out into space, and there was people in costumes, and it was like Star Fox. The gameplay I've never really fallen in love with. I love do a barrel roll, but that's Star Fox 64. But I mean, geez, you want to talk about influence? I mean, Google, for better or worse, one of the largest pieces, one of the largest things that we interact with as a society, in our day-to-day lives, you type in "do a barrel roll" and it reacts to it. I mean, that's a legend. That makes you a legend, Mr. Wayne. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's good. And then also the fact that this gave was one of the more unique levels of how you progress with the story, where you would get to pick which path you go on, and it would determine the difficulty that you would take. So that was also, I thought, very interesting.
This is the one with the noises for voice acting, right? The blah 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 blah.
I think so, yeah, because then by Star Fox 64 they actually had actual dialogue.
Yeah, but you know what though? It still works. Like it works. I can't really explain it, but it works for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. All right, Johnny, why don't you go ahead and give us the next honorable mention that you have?
I think, is that all of mine? Oh no, I have one more. That's right. No, and you know what? It's so funny. I do have one more, but this is the one that I never really played. But here's the thing. Let me explain, because that's a bold statement. I'm about to say it's an honorable mention. I haven't played it. Mario Paint, because Nintendo, I feel like, has always been on the cusp of trying to find new ways to create home interactive software. And Mario Paint is sort of, in my mind, the genesis of that. It allowed people to compose music, to make pieces of art. It's, and even something as silly as like Wii Fit, which is, they're not the same type of game, but they're the same type of concept. We want you to use our system to entertain yourself at home doing something. And it's primarily video games, but every once in a while, they really think outside the box and try to create an experience. And I think Mario Paint is an early example of that, and I think that's to be commended in gaming, personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I did have Mario Paint. This, of course, was interesting because this came with like the mouse and the mouse pad. So it was kind of unique. Something that you would usually use for a computer to be able to use for a console like this. And yeah, just like you said, the ability to just make your own art, make your own music, play these little mini games. I mean, the fact that the opening tile screen was basically just like the title Mario Paint, and then you'd have like a little Mario walk running back and forth across, and every letter you clicked, something different would happen. Just you could just like do that alone for like 5-10 minutes before you even start the game and be entertained by it. So but yeah, I mean, it was just such really very unique for, like you said, for the time. Just again, the different options that you had to be able to do. So yeah, that barely missed my honorable mentions, but definitely I'm glad you mentioned it, because I think it is definitely it was definitely groundbreaking for the time that it came out.
That's cool. I'm glad to hear someone that played it and felt that way. I mean, to me, that's interesting. It's like, what type of experience were they trying to really create? And it's like, well, they wanted to see what experience you can create. And I know it's somewhat rudimentary, but I love the fact that it exists and it was a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I have a couple more honorable mentions here, so I'm just going to kind of, not breeze through them, but kind of talk, good length about them. Another one I had was another launch title that was for the NES, and when it came out in '91, we mentioned Super Mario World, we mentioned F-Zero, and then you have Pilot Wings, which was,
yes.
Very, it was like, one of the first flight simulator video games that were out there for a console, and it was just so, different for the time. Again, the fact that you were able to learn how to basically learn how to fly via video games, and it just was so revolutionary. And I remember this was another one where I think there was a lot of hype behind the Pilot Wing 64 when that came out. That kind of, like I said, and that also kind of unfortunately fell a little bit flat. But again, using the Mode 7 capability, it's just again, just one of those games that was so different and unique for and offered a different different thing for gamers to do, besides the usual aspects of it that we were used to gaming. So I thought that definitely deserved a mention here. Another game we talked about last time on the RPG episode, Chrono Trigger. Another one of those memorable RPGs that's gotten a lot more play over the last couple of years. Like I said, we talked extensively about it in the RPG episode, so we don't have to really go too much into detail about it. And then two other Mario games that I mentioned that I thought deserved to be talked about here. Super Mario Kart, the first of its kind. The opportunity to see these different characters come together and just race on all these very unique tracks was just such a thrill to see. And kind of interesting that they had Donkey Kong Jr. in this game, as well as Koopa Troopa, as kind of to fill out the roster. So I thought those were some interesting choices. And it also gave us the first Rainbow Road, so that would become a staple of Mario Kart over the years. And then the last honorable mention I had was Super Mario All Stars, simply for the fact that it had the first three games, 1, 2, and 3, and also the exclusive Lost Levels episode, the game that I think was only released in Japan for the time, to kind of see those games brought from 8-bit to 16-bit was really kind of cool. And it gave, I think, players an extra, way to, have fun with those games and kind of revisit those games after they had been so successful from the Nintendo. And also kind of served as a good complement to the Super Mario World. So you kind of seen the original 8-bit games at 16-bit, and then you got this game exclusively for Super Nintendo kind of brought to light here. So I wanted to kind of bring those up here. Johnny, did you want to mention anything else about the any of those other games that I mentioned?
Pilot Wings, great choice. I remember it as a launch title. Chrono Trigger, see our RPG episode. Mario Kart, you've said it, and it's another great example of them trying to find another way to entertain people. And then the last one was Mario All-Stars. Talk about a groundbreaking repackage, which has become a standard in video game practices throughout the decades. And how about that? Super Mario Lost Levels is the original Mario 2, right?
Yes.
That game's impossible.
That was the big thing about it, is that's why it wasn't released in the US, was because it was so freaking difficult.
Yeah,
that's why they did the Mario 2 that we ended up getting. So
I don't know that I've even beat like the first world on the Lost Levels. I mean, I don't know that I've tried very hard, but I remember just being a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it frustrated a lot of people. So that was it was kind of cool to see it come back to the Super Nintendo and give gamers another chance to beat it. So, all right, well, that will wrap up our list here for this first half. It's been a really fun first half talking all these Super Nintendo games, but we're now going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we are going to go to the other side of the spectrum and mention some of our favorite Sega Genesis games. This is, of course, Making Mount Rushmore here on the PTB Pop Experience, and we will see you on the other side of this break. And we are back here on Making Mount Rushmore here on the Pop Experience. I am Steve Riddle alongside Johnnie Sea. We are talking video games this episode, specifically two main consoles that were the big rivals throughout the late 80s and early 90s. We, of course, talked all Super Nintendo games in the first half, and now here in the second half, we're going to hop over to the other side and talk about some of our favorite games of the Sega Genesis. it was, like I said, the chief competitor to the Super Nintendo in the early 90s. And as I had mentioned, I had this at my dad's house while I had the Super Nintendo at my mom's house. So I was able to play the best of both worlds here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here with my first entry, my Mount Rushmore of Sega Genesis games. And this is a game that I didn't play a lot of back in the day, but I know it was really big when it came out. It was really considered one of the best Sega Genesis games at the time. Excuse me. And that is Streets of Rage 2. This, of course, was the sequel to Streets of Rage, which had come out in 91. Again, it was one of those games that I didn't play a lot of. I know it's funny. One of the games I remember playing a lot of that I didn't mention about on the Super Nintendo was Final Fight. And,
Yes.
This was almost like their answer to that. But I know it was just, again, one of those side scroller beat 'em up games that are always a lot of fun to play. I loved playing the Final Fight games, and I know if I had played Streets of Rage, I probably would have really loved this game too. Again, just really successful, built off that first game. Again, like I said, considered one of the best games for the Sega Genesis, and still considered one of the best beat 'em up games that has ever been released. So I think it definitely deserved a mention on my Mount Rushmore for the Sega Genesis. Johnny, do you have anything else to say about Streets of Rage 2?
Just that it's a perfect example of a sequel that goes bigger and gets better and has a little bit better of a budget and just has more polish. I love Streets of Rage 2. I love pick and skate, as I think most people probably do, and just flying around the screen. It's a great game.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. All right, why don't you, Johnny, go ahead and give us the first entry on your Mount Rushmore of Sega Genesis games.
Sure. So I don't know that I like this game. I grew up playing this game. I played it incessantly, inside and out. I don't know that I love it, but I think that it was just too darn important to be ignored. And that's Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I mean, it introduces Tails. It expands the graphical potential quite a bit. It's faster. To me, it's like the quintessential Sonic experience, because I feel like it's just got a little bit more polish to it than the first one. But the first one is a little bit more, I don't know. There's some edges around the first one that give it such a unique feel, but I think the second one has more polish. I'm not trying to talk myself out of it. I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain it.
No, I get what you're saying, and I actually had Sonic 2 on my Mount Rushmore as well. Obviously, when you think Sega, you think Sonic, and that first game was so incredibly huge when it came out that there was a lot of expectations for the second game, and it definitely did very well. I mean, like you said, we introduced us to Tails. The soundtrack for it is really fun. I actually love the music for the boss battles. Those are some of my favorites.
Oh yeah.
Doing the it was always fun to go into the when they do the whole the half pipe course to get to the Chaos Emeralds. That's a lot of fun, and just the ability to kind of go back and forth between Sonic and Tails definitely, I think, brought a little extra juice to the game. So again, it's one of those things where you can go either way with all the Sonic games, and I'll probably mention that when we get later in the list. But I think if you ask a lot of people, they'll probably say that while Sonic, this first Sonic, laid the groundwork for things, it was Sonic 2 that built on it and made it even bigger. So I definitely don't knock you for putting Sonic 2 on your list. So great choice there.
Thank you.
All right. Well, why don't you go ahead and give us the next entry on your Mount Rushmore of Sega Genesis games?
All right. So this is I don't know how I was first introduced to this game, but it's to me, it's an absolute classic. It's Shadow Dancer, The Legend of Shinobi. I think it's Shinobi 3 in the canon. I'm not entirely certain, but I feel like this is an early Genesis game where you control. It's a side-scrolling ninja game. You have a dog that you can sick on people. It's tremendous. Great score. nice cinematic presentation, multiple gameplay modes. You can play with a sword or with ninja stars. Difficult. I mean, I don't know, like, I don't know if this game is like known in the cultural zeitgeist or not. I'm sure it probably is, but like I played the hell out of this game, and now it was one of the first games I got for the Genesis because I used to rent it all the time when I would rent a Genesis, which is a crazy concept. But yeah, Shadow Dancer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one I don't remember a ton of. I might remember seeing commercials for it, but yeah, like you said, definitely I think built off the previous games. Coming out in 1990, being one of the top games of the year. So yeah, it's definitely one of those ones I think I might want to at least revisit, and because I do know it was very popular. So definitely one I think is one that's worth a reboot, or I mean a relook at. So good choice.
The dog is just, I mean, it's such a gameplay concept that I don't know. It really it grabbed my attention, and then it goes from there. It's just being a good game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, I will go ahead and give the next entry on my Mount Rushmore of Sega Genesis games. And one of the few times, because usually when it came to the video game consoles, I was always a big, NFL guy, playing the football games. But when I did have the Sega Genesis, I did play a couple of other sports, particularly hockey. And a lot of people, myself included, would say that NHL 94 is not only one of the best Sega Genesis games to come out, but one of the best sports games to come out. You have the ability to do, play either exhibition games or, do a playoffs, mini games. And it just, just the graphics for it were just really cool. The ability to, play it and, play like it's a real life hockey game. And just to be able to, again, just kind of, it kind of laid the, even though there were two other NHL games before it, this was kind of the one that a lot of people see, as what really launched the NHL series going forward to what we have today, to the point that, we did get I think there was like an NHL 94 Rewind game that came out to kind of, bring up, it was in 2020 they did a remake of this called Rewind. So obviously it shows what kind of the impact that this game had when it came out, and it's still considered one of the best games done for the Sega Genesis. So Johnny, do you have anything else to say about NHL 94?
Is this the one that introduced one-timers?
It may have. Actually, yes, it did.
Okay. So it's so funny. I prefer NHLPA 93, but you're absolutely right in everything that you said. If that statement makes sense. I played a shit ton of NHLPA 93 and then ecstatically rented NHL 94 when it came out. I never purchased because NHLPA 93 was like kind of stuck in my muscle memory, but you're right. NHL 94 is the one that made it a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And like I said, it would we would see that continue on throughout the year. So, all right, Johnny, why don't you go ahead and give us the next entry on your Mount Rushmore of Sega Genesis games?
All right, so this is another random one, but it's a port of an arcade game, but it also had an original mode that you could play as well on the Genesis version, and that was the main draw for my nostalgia. But it's a game called Mercs. You may have played it in the arcade. It's a top-down Legend of Zelda style. Well, not at all, but it's a top-down camera view, kind of like Akari Warriors, but a little bit more in depth. And like I said, it had a Genesis exclusive mode that was like playing the actual arcade game, but it was kind of had RPG elements. And I played it incessantly, tried to find the best path. Like it's just one of those things for me as an individual gamer. I can't ignore how much it meant to me playing. Well, that sounds really cheesy, but it was a big part of my game, but the experience of playing the console.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I may have seen this in the arcade myself. So I think I know what you're saying. I think I have seen it before. Of course, it was a sequel to the '85 game Commando, and Yeah, anytime you have those arcade games that, were ported to any console, whether it be Sega, Nintendo, that sort of thing, it was always really cool to be able to play because, that way, you didn't have to, spend a lot of quarters on it in the arcade. You can just play it at home. Doing, like you said, the top-down style for a game for, basically what's a run and shoot game, as opposed to an RPG is really cool. The fact that, that it had its own, unique, mode for the Genesis helped it stand out as well. So yeah, definitely a good choice, and it's definitely, I think, when you think of Capcom, it's definitely up there with one of their best games. So definitely a
Another
good choice there.
another great soundtrack. And Genesis sound was so different from Super Nintendo sound, and I know that's a kind of a side path, but it's such like I'm a big video game music enthusiast, and I don't know the technical specifications, but man, they just sound so differently, but both so awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely they each have their own unique sound, Nintendo and Sega, so it helped them be different from each other. So I
Yeah,
definitely agree with you on that.
it's crazy, especially when you think about games that were ported to both, how differently they were. Like that's not something you get. Well, I guess it is actually. I was gonna say it's something you don't get to experience, but I was thinking of the exclusivity contracts most of these games have now, but then they go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the funny thing too. When I was putting my list together, I tried to make sure I wanted to pick games that were like exclusive for one console and weren't ported between the two. So,
Completely
um,
agree.
so
Although
with
every Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter for Super Nintendo is also really good too.
hmm yeah, because you forget how many games the two consoles shared. So it
Oh
was.
yeah, you would see a game advertisement in a gaming magazine or just a comic book or something, and you would, if the game looked interesting, you would immediately go to the bottom right away and be like, okay, what is it on? Yes, I have that. Sounds
Right.
stupid, but it's the truth.
And no, well, going back to the wrestling tie, those that remember the old calls, the old videos that came out in the '90s when they did the acclaim tips at the end.
Oh, that's
They would always
right.
Todd would always mention whether the game was for Super Nintendo, for Sega Genesis, or for both. So that was always pretty cool as well.
Yeah, I reviewed in your house recently, and they were trying to sell the WrestleMania arcade game. The PlayStation version was the cheapest, the Genesis was in the middle, and the Super Nintendo version was still the most expensive at the time, even in '95. Uh,
Hmm.
just showing sort of like the how the video game wars were going at the time, and with Super Nintendo being cartridge based and Genesis not having as much going on under the hood. It's just craziness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, I will go ahead and give my last entry on my Mount Rushmore at Sega Genesis games, and this was another one that I do remember seeing a lot of commercials for it. Not one that I played a ton of, but I know it was pretty unique again, and that's Kid Chameleon. Um, you had the ability. You played this kid Casey who had the ability to take all these be these different characters just by wearing a unique mask. And like I said, I do remember seeing the commercials for it on TV occasionally, and it looked like an interesting game, but one I never just unfortunately got around to. It had a lot of levels in it, over 100 of them, which was crazy for at that time for a console. Um, and eventually would be included in the when PS2 and PlayStation Portable did their Sega Genesis collection. This was one of the games included. And again, just maybe not on the same level as some of the other games that we've talked about, but I think it's one that was very like I said, unique for the time and definitely interesting for the Sega Genesis and for the type of game that it was. So I thought it definitely at least deserved a mention. Johnny, do you have anything else to say about Kid Chameleon?
I don't have much experience with it except for the fact that I agree it's on like every compilation you can get, and I believe it's a first party game, so that might make it an easier to include. But I think it's also included because it has clout. I've never really gotten into it, but I agree with the pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, you have one entry left on your Mount Rushmore Sega Genesis games, so why don't you go ahead and give it to us?
Well, sure thing, and not to be anticlimactic, but we talked about it somewhat in our RPG episode. I don't know that it made anybody's actual list. Maybe it was just honorable mentions. But it's Phantasy Star 4: End of the Millennium. I mean, the Phantasy Star series is, I was gonna say infamous. It's taken all sorts of courses throughout its lifetime. But the fourth one was a culmination, and it was a massive game, extremely expensive. And the copy that I would incessantly rent from my local video store, somebody had a save file that was all the way at the end of the game. Thank God, because that's the only way I got to experience it. Nobody that rented it ever erased it. But in later in life, getting to play through it all the way through, it's a classic RPG. I mean, it presses the limits of the Genesis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is another one I think I might have missed when I was growing up. I think when we were talking RPGs, we did mention it briefly, and I think somebody had as an honorable mention. But again, kind of built off the previous games in the Phantasy Star series, and actually was the last one in the original series as well. So a fitting conclusion for this series. Pretty popular when it came out. So I think when you're talking RPGs and games for the Genesis, I think this is definitely a very good pick. So I'll definitely give you that one, Johnny.
Nice. Well, I mean, it's just it's one of those it was either a thing or it wasn't, and again, I hate to be anticlimactic with RPGs on top, but it is what it is. It's just my genre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and everyone has their unique games that are drawn to. So definitely a good choice there. All right, well, that will wrap it up for both of our main lists. But again, we do have plenty of honorable mentions to talk about, so we're going to go ahead and get deep into those. I'm going to go ahead and get my first honorable mention here, and that's a very interesting game that tied into a great to a great music artist at the time, and that's of course Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. Playing off, of course, the movie that he did. They turned it into a video game, and just the absolute uniqueness of seeing a Michael Jackson game, especially for that time when he was really kind of hitting his peak at that time. Really, it just I think was very unique. Just the fact that following this the movie and some of the the attacks that you had through that he did, and I think like one of his special attacks was like him doing his dances that caused all the enemies to die. So I just thought that for the Sega Genesis it was very interesting just to kind of see a game with Michael Jackson in it. I thought definitely more to mention at least. Do you have anything else to say about Michael Jackson's Moonwalker?
Oh, I love that game. That's one of the games that drew my interest to wanting to play a Sega, because I couldn't play that on regular Nintendo. I had seen the movie, and the game came out shortly after, and there's a lot of brand identity there, and I don't say that to joke. Obviously, it's we're talking about in the time that it came out, but there was a lot of cachet there. There was a lot of star power. So, but it is a great, ridiculous game where you can make your enemies dance. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I just remember the one where like he's in the graveyard and he's fighting all the zombies, and he like busts out the special move and they're all doing the Thriller dance. So
yeah, I mean, and the music too. I mean, all digitized, 16-bit tracks of his hits. I mean, it's tremendous.
Oh yeah, definitely. All right, why don't you go ahead and give us one of your honorable mentions?
Oh man, now this is a game that I played incessantly, just as a way to kill time. Sometimes it's kind of funny in later life. Like, I'm not a sandbox video game fan. Like, you hand me a copy of Grand Theft Auto and I'll never get anywhere because I can't force myself to go through the missions and what have you. But Toejam and Earl was sort of an open world game like that, where levels would randomly generate every time you played it, and a great soundtrack and just the stupidest gameplay. And Toejam and Earl should have been legendary Genesis mascots, and they kind of fell off the map. But what a unique experience! I still have not really played a game like it. since it came out. I mean, and it had a pretty heavy marketing campaign behind it too. So I wonder how many 90s kids out there remember Toejam. These guys were definitely poochified. These were much more poochy than Diddy Kong. All right, but especially Toejam.
I had this in my honorable mentions as well, just because I remember just what an insane game it looked like. And it's funny, I'm the exact opposite actually. I love Grand Theft Auto, so I could play those.
So did you ever beat Toejam and Earl?
I don't think I did. I mean,
okay.
I played it a few times, but it's not one that I played a lot. I do kind of wish I did though, because I mean, just because again, this is another one I remember the commercials for, and it just was so out there. In terms of like the gameplay and the characters and and everything, and like you said, for a while they were kind of considered the number 2 mascots there for Sega behind Sonic.
Yeah.
But they just kind of, like you said, just I mean they had other games come out, but then they just kind of
that sequel blows.
So.
That sequel's awful, man. The Escape from Funkatron or whatever.
Yeah, Panic on Funkatron.
Yes. No, thank you on that one, good sir.
I think this is one of those ones where it's like, what could have been. But I think if you do ask a lot of kids that grew up in the 90s that did play the Sega Genesis, I think they will tell you that they remember Toejam and Earl. So definitely one I think definitely deserves a mention.
Yeah, now I kind of want to, now I kind of want to play it because I got this song stuck in my head. So there you go.
Oh, good. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and give another one of my honorable mentions here. Another game that I do remember seeing a couple times in commercials. I think a few there was a few like tie-ins with some restaurants that they did with it, and that's Comic Zone. Kind of an interesting. It wasn't related to any DC or Marvel comics or anything else at the time. It was just the fact that you basically were playing a video game that was done in the style of, it was basically done as a comic style. You go from page to page, going through the story. And again, just one of those games where it's just, just felt so unique for its time. And as I said, I think there were a couple of they did a few tie-ins with a few restaurants. I feel like Pizza Hut was one of those that did like a tie-in.
That would not surprise me.
Yeah. So, but like I said, just another one of those games, the fact that you basically could play through a comic book, was, I think just a unique experience for the time. So I thought it definitely deserved a mention. Did you have anything else to say about Comic Zone?
I mean, again, this is another one of those games that's always on ported collections. Do you know if it came out later in the console's lifespan? Because I feel like this is one of the last games I had interest in, but I think I had moved on to play. I don't know. I've definitely rented it, but I just wonder why it didn't, because I'm a huge comics fan. I don't know why it didn't. Well, of course, at the time I wasn't, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it came out in 95.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I guess, that would have been this. Yeah, I got a PlayStation 95, I think, because that's the year Mortal Kombat 3. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to conduct therapy on the air here.
No, it's all good. That will be another possibly a future Mount Rushmore when we talk about the PlayStation,
sure.
Some of the games there. So, all right, why don't you go ahead and give us another honorable mention that you have?
All right, so I think this was a Genesis exclusive. I hope it was, because I'm like you. I kind of wanted to stick to exclusives because I know my next one breaks that. It's a racing game, which I'm not a huge fan of, but this was sort of like professional wrestling mixed with like motorcycle racing, and I kind of loved it. It's called Road Rash. I don't know if you ever played it. But it's a racing game where you can kick your opponent and use find weapons, but there's like a little narrative that goes to it. Most of the CPU drivers have stupid names, and makes them somewhat memorable, and you can get arrested by the cops, which is awful feeling when you're about to win and you get arrested. It's a great little game. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I don't know if it's remembered or not, but I loved it.
Yeah, again, this is one I think I may have played like once or twice. I remember looking at it here. It looks like that they made this to kind of combat. I think it was Nintendo at the time was doing a Mario Andretti Racing, so this was kind of their answer to that. And just think the fact that we it was so different, that you now race on motorcycles instead of cars, and the fact that you can knock your opponent off the bike to get to take the lead, and also the kind of interesting thing where you can get arrested, and that might affects if you're your ability to win. So yeah, it's definitely another good choice here. It was another game that was like really critically acclaimed when it came out. There were some sequels after it, and it I think it's again one of those ones where I think you may not think about it at the moment, but then when you kind of look back and then you read about it, like, oh yeah, I remember that game.
Yeah, it's a very Genesis. Like there are some games that are just like, oh man, that's such a Genesis game. And if you had the Genesis, you kind of know what that means. It's like Toejam and Earl. It's just such a, if you either had a Genesis or you didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. All right, I'll go ahead and give my next entry here, and another game that's kind of it's kind of I don't want to say cheating because it was a Sega game. It was released on the Genesis, but it was also released on the Mega Drive as well, and that's Altered Beast. When I look at the kind of the gameplay for it, it almost kind of reminds me in a way of Ghosts and Goblins, which of course was the real kind of the Nintendo game of it. But again, it's just one of those side-scroller beat-em-ups. You're basically you're trying to save Athena from Neff, and just all these different monsters and undead characters just all coming at you. And another game that was really it was kind of mixed. It had mixed reviews when it came out, but it ended up being one of the best highest grossing games that came out in 1988. Actually might be one of the oldest titles we've talked about to this point. But it really again was just very different and unique for its time and event. And I don't know if it spawned much of a franchise after this, just because I think the gameplay was very not well received through it. But I think it's definitely one when you remember Sega games, this is one of the first ones you think of.
Wasn't this packaged with the Genesis? Like,
it was, yeah. It was one of the packing games when it came out in '88. So
yeah, I mean, this game's. I've talked on this a few times, or casually mentioned I would rent a Genesis. Like when I got it was like a big thing. My parents would rent a Genesis, and Altered Beast always came with it because I guess when the video game store bought it, it came with it. So, but yeah, it's a great game. I mean, it totally belongs here. I just don't know if I'd run out and want to play it.
Right. I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I believe you have one honorable mention left on your list, so go ahead and give it to us.
Yeah, for sure. And it is a game that has received some ports across platforms, but it's so special to me, and it's kind of like Streets of Rage 2 because it is a beat 'em up. So the death of Superman was such a huge thing, and I wanted to understand it, but back then, not only was I a kid without money, but it was really hard to figure out what comics I needed to read to understand it. And DC Comics made a side-scroller beat 'em up called The Death and Return of Superman that told the story of the death and return of Superman with all the 4 imposter Supermen. And I mean, Doomsday and everything. It kind of gave you just what you needed to know. And it was like getting to see almost like a new Superman movie or something like that. I don't know if that is adequately explained, but it's The Death and Return of Superman for Sega Genesis. You can play as Superman, Superboy, Steel, the Eradicator, or Cyborg Superman at various times. They all control a little differently. And yeah, I don't know that it's a great game, but man, it was a big one for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was another one I missed. I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest comics guy. I mean, I've read a few of them. I am aware of the Death of Superman story and how huge it was for the time, just to see this great superhero meet his end at the hands of Doomsday, and to see kind of it play out where you can actually play it in a video game. I think is definitely a really cool choice here. I mean, yeah. You guys. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it had some cutscenes, it had some dialogue, and I had read a book that told the story. But it was a novel. It wasn't a comic book. And so now I got to finally see it with animation, with panels coming to life. It was just, it was kind of like seeing a new Superman movie. I know that sounds corny, but this was back in the day and it was all we had. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And, everyone, those, anytime you have a game based off a comic book, it's going to be, it could be hit or miss. So,
yes, that is also very true.
Superman for the N64, I'm looking at you.
Yes. Yeah. Because those licenses, they were just giving licenses out a dime a dozen, the same they were with everything. Put it on a t-shirt, put on a lunchbox, make a game of it real quick. The gameplay's fine. It can be a little wonky. I think it's Acclaim, but don't put money on it. But yeah, it's, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, I have two more on my my honorable mentions, and they're actually both the same, cut from the same cloth in essence. We of course talked about Sonic 2, which we both had on our lists. I did include the original Sonic the Hedgehog just because it was such a big launcher for the Sega Genesis. Introduced Sonic to the lexicon. Again, just the fact that you seeing this like side scroller, collecting the rings, getting the Chaos Emeralds, beating, fighting Dr. Robotnik. Sonic became, to Sega what Mario was to Nintendo. So, and it really started with this game. And then I also had, I did have Sonic 3, Sonic and Knuckles on here as well, just because, it did introduce us to Knuckles. Again, kind of continued to build off what Sonic and Sonic 2 did, and just became another great addition in the franchise and made Sonic even bigger. To the point that he got so many other games. Got a couple. I think he had his own cartoon series, and then of course, way down the line, we of course got the two movies that everyone had been waiting for all the time. And then, when the first trailer came out for the first Sonic movie, everyone got so freaked out just because of how Sonic looked. But it ended up, they ended up, altering it, and then it worked out in the end because both Sonic and Sonic 2 did extremely well and are considered some of the best video game movies of all time, which unfortunately is kind of a low bar because video game movies have had a lot more misses than hits. But I think again, when you're talking Sega, you have to include Sonic just because of how important he was to the franchise.
Yeah,
and to the console itself.
Absolutely, he's their everything. The concept of Sonic and Knuckles too was also kind of it was a risk in terms of offering something different, and I think that should always be rewarded. So I definitely agree with that. Sonic 3 kind of lost me, personally. But Sonic and Knuckles was something that I rented quite a bit of. But Sonic 3, I don't know, I missed it, Mm-hmm. But ironically, I loved 1 and 2, so I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, we all have, like I said, our particular favorites when it comes to those franchises. So
I was playing a lot of Mortal Kombat. Can I the Mortal Kombat for Sega Genesis, I feel like warrants a mention. And I'm not trying to hijack the show, my man. Please, because you could unlock the blood, which I'm not seeing it was important to me because that's the way the game was intended. But at the same time, you cannot look past how controversial that was at the time, and it was I don't know, it was quite an interesting time. An interesting thing for people to care about. But I still remember the blood code because, I had to memorize it because I wouldn't play without it. So I just got to give a shout out to the original Mortal Kombat.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, like you said, that was a huge game when it came out. And it is one of the games that was ported for both the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. And I can't remember if the Super Nintendo even had the blood code. Like, I feel like that was a Sega.
No, it was all
exclusive.
Yep. It was all sweat instead of blood, and then they even had different fatalities to change it up so it wouldn't be as gory.
Right, but I feel which makes sense because I feel like Nintendo has always kind of geared itself more towards a younger crowd, whereas maybe the Sega was more towards like a little bit of an older crowd, hence why they had it. So
It sucked because Super Nintendo felt more like the arcade game, but the Genesis had the blood, but it was certainly like its own thing. So Super Nintendo was like the better looking movie, but Genesis had, the features that you wanted. It's a silly comparison, but it's the way it is. It's how my brain works.
No, I agree, and I think a lot of people would probably would definitely say the same thing that did play both. So
Yep.
definitely that's a good comparison there. All right, well that will wrap things up here for this episode. We did a lot of great games on both the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, and again, hopefully this will be a topic we revisit down the line, talking about some other consoles in the future. But right now, let's talk about where everyone can find us on social media and what's all you got going on in terms of podcasts. So, Johnny, go ahead and let us know.
Well, sure. I'm on Twitter at the Johnnie Sea. It's JonnieSea. And then I'm on North South once a month doing the Multiverse of Fabulousness, where we look at pop culture variants, travel to different Earths, and play games sometimes, alter some things, and rebook some wrestling shows. All sorts of wild stuff we've done on there. And then I have my own feed called the New TNN because, you put new in front of anything and it automatically makes it better. But I do a bunch of shows on there. I do some list stuff, do some old school wrestling reviews, do some bad movie reviews, just try to have fun, kind of look at everything through a lens of humor. But it's a good time. I enjoy it quite a bit. We just celebrated our 100th episode where we made fun of the legendary film Rollerball. So, yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, definitely, and I will say for the for those of you if you haven't listened to the Multiverse of Fabulousness, definitely check it out. Johnny does a great job with it. I'm kind of behind on some of these podcasts, so I got to catch up. The last one I listened to was where you rebooked WCW Battle Bowl '93 as a WWF pay-per-view, and I thought you did a really great job with that. Some of the choices were definitely a bit out there, but I think for the most part, all the heavy hitters at that time for the WWF were definitely well covered. So I'll definitely give you credit for that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And yeah, we try to, you got to have rules when you do those things. And I try to, it'd be easy to just book the best thing possible, but I don't know. But you're not making fun of my Macho Man Shawn Michaels dream team, are you?
No, I think
Okay.
I think that was great. So
because I was trying to remember that show, and I was like, oh, that's the one where I waxed poetic on HBK and Macho Man being a tag team, for one night only.
Right. No, it was definitely great. So yeah, be sure to check that out, as well as everything else on North South. Lots of great shows over there. It's also, of course, the home of the Jenny Position, of Jennifer Smith's great shows, so be sure to check those out as well. As for me, you can usually find me over here on this pop feed. In addition to the show, I have Pop Goes the Classics, where myself, Andy Atherton, and Miranda Berthold are going through all of the Disney animated films. Most recent episode, we did The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Lots of fun there. So our next episode will be Hercules. Hopefully we should, if we don't do it this month, hopefully we'll be able to do it before the end of the year, as we look forward to continuing on through the journey into 2023. I also am part of the Video Jukebox Song of the Day. Right now it's pretty much just been me and Andy doing that, but we basically, what we do is every Monday through Friday, we live watch a music video and talk about it. So it's a lot of fun to do. Lots of great different videos we've done. We do different theme weeks. Like, for example, we recently did one where we covered all Weird Al Yankovic songs. And upcoming for our for Thanksgiving, we will be doing a week all dedicated to songs about home. So be sure to check all that out. And you can also find me over on the PTB Wrestling feed, where myself and James Grunberg have Extreme Resurrection, where we are going through the ECW revival that the WWE did. We are into 2007. Last episode we touched on the 2 episodes going into No Way Out, so we are now going to be covering the fallout from that and continuing on the road to WrestleMania 23. So looking forward to getting to some of those episodes as we continue the ECW Originals New Breed feud. You can usually find me over on the PTB Facebook page, where we have a lot of great discussions, questions, occasional tournaments going on. So if you're not involved in that, drop us a line and we'll invite you to join. With that said, I want to again thank Johnny for coming on and joining me here. This was a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing what we have planned for the end of the year. So for Johnnie Sea, I am Steve Riddle. This has been Making Mount Rushmore, and we will see you next time.